Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at the history of solar energy conversion.
Okay.
Specifically, the surprisingly recent history
Right.
of solar energy.
Mhm.
We're going to be looking at the very first patent for a silicon solar cell.
Sounds good.
So I don't know about you, but I never really stopped to think about, where did solar panels even come from?
Right.
Like, when was the first one even made?
Yeah.
And it turns out it's actually a lot more recent than I thought it would be. The patent that we're going to be looking at today was filed on February 5th, 1957.
Wow. That's pretty recent.
Yeah, so this is, less than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And, thinking about 1957, technologically speaking, the world was a very different place.
Oh, yeah. Definitely a different world back then. Like, think about it. Computers were these, massive room-sized machines.
Right.
And the idea of carrying around a phone in your pocket, I mean, forget about it.
No, totally. And yet here we have this patent for a device that can directly convert sunlight into electricity.
It's really remarkable.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I've been poring over this patent, and I got to say, the drawings and descriptions are fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a little window into the minds of these early solar pioneers.
I bet. What stood out to you?
Well, one thing that really struck me was the visual of the solar cell itself. They describe it as having this grid-like pattern, with all these tiny little squares connected together.
Oh, interesting.
It almost looks like a mosaic.
Oh, I see what you mean. And that actually makes a lot of sense when you consider the technology at the time. Those early solar cells were pretty tiny, nothing like the large panels we see today.
So to get any kind of usable power out of them.
Exactly. They had to connect a bunch of these small cells together, both in series and in parallel, to increase the voltage and current.
So it was like building a power grid in miniature.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
fascinating to see how they tackled those early challenges, and it really highlights how far solar technology has come since then.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the patent's visuals, it's clear that silicon plays a pretty central role. It's
Yeah.
like the heart of the solar cell.
It is.
Why silicon, though? Like, what made that the material of choice? And is it still the main material used in solar panels today?
Silicon is actually the second most abundant element on Earth's crust.
Wow, I did not know that.
So it's readily available and relatively inexpensive to obtain.
Okay.
But aside from its abundance, silicon also has these awesome properties that make it perfect for converting sunlight into electricity.
Okay.
For instance, when silicon is exposed to air, it naturally forms a transparent oxide coating.
Oh.
And this coating helps to minimize light reflection. It's like it has a built-in anti-glare feature, you know.
Wow, so nature basically handed us the perfect material for solar cells.
Pretty much. And yeah, silicon is still the primary material used in most solar panels today. Though, researchers are always looking for new materials that might be even more efficient at converting sunlight.
So it's always evolving.
Always evolving.
Interesting. Well, digging deeper into this patent, I came across a phrase that kind of threw me for a loop. It mentions something called a boron-diffused p-type layer.
Right.
And honestly, that just sounds like a bunch of technical jargon to me.
Well, it might sound like a secret code,
Yeah.
but it's actually a key concept in how solar cells work. So to understand this,
Okay.
we got to dive a little bit into the world of semiconductors.
Okay.
Now, semiconductors are these materials with electrical conductivity that's somewhere between think of a copper wire and an insulator like rubber.
Okay, got it. So they're like the in-betweeners of the electrical world.
Yeah, exactly. Now, picture a battery, right? It has a positive terminal and a negative terminal.
Yeah.
Well, semiconductors also have these positive and negative counterparts, and they're called p-type and n-type. So the boron diffused layer is basically a clever way to create a p-type layer on silicon.
Okay.
What they do is introduce a tiny bit of boron into the silicon, and that changes the silicon's electrical properties, making it a p-type semiconductor.
So by adding a little bit of boron, they're creating this positive-negative kind of dynamic within the silicon.
Exactly. And when you combine a p-type layer and an n-type layer, you create what's called a p-n junction. And this junction, that's where the magic happens. Like, literally, that's the heart of the solar cell.
So it's like the engine of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's like the engine that makes it all work.
Got it.
When sunlight hits the silicon, it knocks electrons loose, which creates these things called electron-hole pairs.
Huh. Interesting.
Think of these pairs as tiny packets of energy. Now, the p-n junction acts like an electric field, and it separates these electron-hole pairs.
Okay.
And that separation, that's what causes the flow of electrons, which is, electricity.
So it's the combination of these different types of silicon, the p-type that's created by the boron, and the original n-type silicon that makes the whole system actually work.
Yeah, that's how you get the electricity flowing. And this technique, this boron diffusion technique, it was a real game changer back then. It allowed them to make thinner and more efficient solar cells, which paved the way for the technology that we have today.
Wow. It's amazing how something as small as adding a bit of boron can have such a huge impact on the development of solar energy.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes the tiniest tweaks can lead to the biggest breakthroughs. And speaking of breakthroughs, this patent also addresses a really fundamental challenge when it comes to, energy storage.
You're talking about the part where they mentioned a unilaterally conducting element. Because I gotta be honest, when I read that, I had no idea what they were talking about.
Yeah, it sounds a little cryptic, right? But it's actually a very clever solution to a problem that anyone working with solar energy has to solve. See, when a solar cell generates electricity, it charges a battery, right? But when the sun goes down,
Yeah.
the current could actually flow back from the battery through the solar cell and drain the battery.
So they needed a way to make sure the energy flow was only going in one direction, like a valve in a water pipe.
Perfect analogy. That's exactly what this unilaterally conducting element does. It's like a one-way valve for electricity. It lets current flow from the solar cell to the battery when the sun is shining,
Okay.
but it blocks the current from flowing back the other way when it's dark, so the battery can charge up properly
Okay.
and store that energy for later use.
That's pretty ingenious when you think about it. So it's not just about generating the power, it's about being able to efficiently store that power too.
Absolutely. You got to manage that energy flow. And this seemingly small detail, this one-way valve, it actually highlights a really fundamental principle of energy management that's still relevant today
Right.
in all sorts of solar energy systems.
It's just amazing to me how much thought and innovation is packed into this one patent document.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
It's not just about like the basics of solar energy,
Yeah.
but also the nuances of efficiency, energy storage, and all these other things.
Definitely. It's a real treasure trove of information. And there's actually a lot more to uncover. Like, they even talk about using a polystyrene coating to improve light capture.
Oh, yeah. I was wondering
Yeah.
about that. So, like, are you saying that they were already thinking about ways to make their solar cells more efficient back then?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's just one example. There are so many cool details in this patent that show just how forward-thinking these early inventors really were.
Well, I'm definitely intrigued. I guess we'll have to dive deeper to those details in our next segment.
Sounds like a plan. I can't wait to share more of this fascinating history with you.
Me too. All right, everyone. We'll be back after a short break to continue our deep dive into the surprisingly recent origins of solar technology. Stay tuned.
So yeah, they were definitely already thinking about efficiency way back then.
Okay.
Like you mentioned earlier, they talk about using a polystyrene coating in the patent.
Right.
And that was all about improving light capture. Polystyrene has this specific refractive index that makes it a really good anti-reflective layer.
Okay, so it's like giving the solar cell a pair of glasses to help it see the sunlight better.
Exactly. It lets more light actually reach the silicon and get converted into electricity instead of just bouncing right off.
That's pretty smart.
Ugh.
So is that something that's still used in modern solar panels?
Absolutely. The principle is the same, but the materials have gotten, even more sophisticated over time. We use these really advanced anti-reflective coatings today that are incredibly effective at trapping light. It's all about, squeezing every last drop of energy out of the sunlight.
Wow, it's really amazing how they were already thinking about this stuff back in the 50s.
Yeah, it really shows how much these early pioneers understood about the fundamentals of solar energy.
So, what else did they focus on when it came to efficiency? Did anything else stand out to you in the patent?
Well, another thing that caught my eye was their emphasis on what they called leakage resistance.
Leakage resistance.
Yeah, they talk about using like wax or other sealant materials to make sure there's really high resistance between the different layers of the solar cell.
Okay. I'm not sure I follow. What was the point of that?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine you're building a house, right?
Okay.
You wouldn't want any gaps or cracks in the walls or the roof
Right.
because, those gaps would let in drafts and make the house less energy efficient.
Right. Yeah, yeah, I got it.
Well, the same thing applies to solar cells. Any unwanted electrical pathways between those layers, it's basically like having those leaks in your house. It drains energy from the system and makes the whole thing less efficient.
Oh, okay. So they were trying to make sure everything was properly sealed and insulated so there wouldn't be any energy escaping.
Exactly. They were really meticulous about it. And this focus on detail, it's something we still see today in modern solar panel manufacturing. Like nowadays, they use these really advanced encapsulation techniques and materials to protect the delicate components inside and make sure those panels are going to last a long time.
Wow. So those seemingly small details, like adding a coating here or a little bit of sealant there, they can actually make a big difference in the overall performance of the solar cell.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's often where the biggest innovations come from, a deep understanding of those fundamental principles and a real commitment to refining every aspect of the technology.
Yeah, it's really impressive. As we're digging into this patent, it's just striking to me how much these inventors were thinking ahead. Like
Yeah.
they weren't just trying to, solve the immediate challenges of making a solar cell. They were laying the groundwork for the future of solar energy.
Totally. They were true visionaries. I mean, it did take a while for solar technology to really take off, but their work has had a profound impact.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I noticed in the patent was that they described those early solar cells as being pretty small. Like they even talked about having to connect multiple cells together to get enough power to actually do anything useful.
Right. I mean, back then, the limitations in cell size and efficiency, it meant that solar technology was really only good for like specialized low power applications. You couldn't really use it to power a house or a business or anything like that.
Well, and that's obviously very different from what we see today. I mean, now we have these massive solar farms spreading across entire landscapes. What were the main factors that led to such a dramatic change?
Well, it was a combination of things, really. Material science played a huge role. Like, as researchers developed new materials and techniques, they were able to make much larger and more efficient solar cells.
Okay, so that's one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And then manufacturing processes also got a lot more sophisticated, so we could start mass producing solar panels at a much lower cost. And of course, government policies and incentives have also played a big role in encouraging the adoption of solar energy around the world.
Right, right. So it was a combination of technological breakthroughs, economic forces, and political will that really pushed solar energy into the mainstream.
Yeah, exactly. It was a perfect storm of progress. And to think it all started with those fundamental principles outlined in this one amazing patent from 1957.
It's really quite a story, a testament to human ingenuity and our desire to harness the power of nature, for the good of society.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, where will solar technology go from here? What other incredible breakthroughs are just waiting to be discovered?
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But one thing's for sure, the future of solar energy is looking very bright.
We'll be right back after a short break to wrap up our deep dive into the world of solar power. Don't go away. It really is. I mean, just imagine like flexible solar cells that you can roll up like a newspaper,
Oh,
or transparent solar panels that can be built right into windows,
that would be incredible.
or even like solar fabrics that can, turn our clothes into power generator.
It sounds like something straight out of like a sci-fi movie.
I know, right? But this stuff is actually happening. And to think it all goes back to those fundamental principles that were laid out in, that 1957 patent that we've been talking about.
It really shows you the power of building on the work of those who came before us. I mean, that patent, it wasn't just about creating a solar cell that worked. It was about sparking a whole new way of thinking about energy in general.
Yeah. And it's a vision that's more important than ever today, I think. I mean, with climate change and the growing demand for energy, solar power is really poised to play a huge role in, our transition to a more sustainable future.
And thanks to those early innovators, it seems like we're well on our way to making that vision a reality.
For sure. I mean, this deep dive has really given me a whole new appreciation for the history of solar energy and all the, incredible work that went into making it what it is today.
It's been a fascinating journey, from those early like mosaic-like cells to the sleek, powerful panels that we see all over the place now,
Hmm.
and then looking ahead to, all the amazing possibilities that the future holds.
It's really inspiring.
It is.
Yeah.
I think what I find most impressive is just how much foresight and ingenuity those early pioneers had. I mean, they were working with such limited technology and resources, but they still managed to envision a future where we can harness the power of the sun for clean, abundant energy.
Yeah, they were way ahead of their time.
They were.
And you know what? I hope this deep dive has inspired you to look at solar panels a little differently.
I think it has.
I mean, they're not just like pieces of technology, you know? They're symbols of human innovation and our never-ending quest for a better world.
That's a great way to put it. Well, that's all the time we have for today.
Oh, all right.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the surprisingly recent origins of solar technology.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.